The rain was coming down hard that October night when my father's phone rang at 2:47 a.m. I could hear the panic in his voice from across the hotel room as he spoke to someone on the other end. His prized Lamborghini Huracan, the car he'd bragged about to every business associate, the symbol of his success, had broken down on a deserted stretch of highway outside Phoenix. The nearest dealership was 200 miles away, closed until Monday, and he had the most important presentation of his career in 8 hours. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. That's when he did something he'd never done before in my 26 years of life. He called me. The same man who'd told me just 3 months earlier that I was wasting my potential working as a mechanic. The same man who'd refused to attend my automotive certification ceremony because he was embarrassed to tell his colleagues what his son did for a living. Now, with his back against the wall and his empire on the line, I was suddenly the only person who could save him. Growing up in Scottsdale, Arizona, I always knew my father, Richard Blackwood, expected greatness from me. He'd built Blackwood, financial from nothing, a small accounting firm that grew into one of the Southwest's most prestigious investment companies. Our house overlooked the desert mountains, complete with a circular driveway that housed his collection of luxury cars. The crown jewel was always whatever sports car he'd bought that year, and for the past 2 years, it had been that metallic blue Lamborghini. My mother, Patricia, tried to bridge the gap between us, but she'd given up trying to change Richard years ago. She understood that his drive for success came from growing up poor in rural Montana, but she also saw how it was destroying our relationship. While other kids played catch with their dads, mine was always at the office or networking at some country club event. I discovered my passion for cars early. While Richard saw vehicles as status symbols, I saw them as puzzles to solve. I'd spend hours in our garage, taking apart lawnmower engines and rebuilding them just to understand how they worked. My mother secretly bought me car magazines and mechanic tools for birthdays, hiding them from Richard, who preferred giving me business books and calculators. When I turned 16, instead of getting excited about the BMW Richard wanted to buy me, I begged him to let me work at Murphy's Auto Repair downtown. Old Frank Murphy was a legend. He'd been fixing cars since the 1970s and could diagnose problems just by listening to an engine. Richard was horrified. He actually drove down to the shop to meet Frank, probably hoping to talk him out of hiring. Frank told me later that Richard had stood in his oil-stained garage wearing a $3,000 suit, looking around like he'd walked into a crime scene. "Your boy's got real talent," Frank had said. "Natural understanding of mechanical systems I haven't seen in decades." Richard just shook his head and left without saying goodbye to either of us. That summer at Murphy's changed everything for me. I learned that every car has its own personality, its own quirks and characteristics. A 1967 Mustang purrs differently than a 2010 Camaro. A diesel engine has a completely different rhythm than a V8. Frank taught me to listen, really listen, to what machines were trying to tell you, but Richard saw it as a phase. When I started my senior year, he enrolled me in advanced placement, business classes, and began talking about my future at Arizona State, studying finance or economics. He'd already planned my internship at Blackwood Financial and had started introducing me to clients as my future business partner. The fights started getting worse. Richard would come home and find grease under my fingernails, and he'd launch into lectures about professional appearance and making something of yourself. He'd point to the Lamborghini in the driveway and say, "This is what success looks like, Marcus, not crawling around under broken-down cars." Everything came to a head during my high school graduation party. Richard had invited his entire business network, probably 40 people in expensive suits standing around our backyard, drinking wine and talking about market trends. Frank Murphy showed up wearing his cleanest work shirt and a tie he'd probably owned since 1985. He found me by the Idaho pool and shook my hand. "Proud of you, son," he said. "You've got a real gift. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Richard appeared beside us, champagne glass in hand, and Frank extended his calloused hand for a shake. The conversation that followed still plays, in my mind, like a bad movie. Frank started telling everyone within earshot about my mechanical abilities, how I'd successfully rebuilt a transmission on a 1992 Honda Civic that 3 other shops had given up on. Richard's face went red. He actually interrupted Frank mid-sentence and said, "That's very nice, but Marcus will be studying business in the fall. This car hobby has been a good learning experience, but it's time to focus on real career opportunities." Frank looked confused. "Real career? Son, there are master mechanics making 6 figures. The automotive industry is for people without better options." Richard cut him off. "My son has better options." The party got quiet. Frank nodded slowly, patted my shoulder, and left without another word. I didn't see him again for 2 years. College was a disaster. I tried to focus on business classes, but my heart wasn't in it. I'd skip marketing lectures to watch YouTube videos about engine rebuilds. Instead of studying for economics exams, I'd read automotive trade magazines. My grades reflected my lack of interest, and Richard's disappointment grew with every semester. During my junior year, I finally broke. I walked into Richard's office on a Tuesday afternoon and told him I was dropping out to pursue automotive technology. The screaming match that followed could probably be heard 3 floors down. Richard accused me of throwing away opportunities he'd never had. He said I was being selfish and ungrateful. Then he said the words that cut deepest. "If you want to, waste your life as just a mechanic. Don't expect me to pretend I'm proud of it." I moved out that week. Patricia helped me pack, crying the entire time. But Richard didn't even come home to say goodbye. I got a small apartment across town and enrolled in the Universal Technical Institute's automotive program. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. The technical program was intense but incredible. I learned everything from basic diagnostics to advanced computer systems. Modern cars aren't just mechanical anymore. They're rolling computers with dozens of sensors and processors. I discovered I had a knack for electrical troubleshooting that even impressed my instructors. After graduation, I got hired at Precision Automotive, a high-end shop that specialized in luxury imports. The owner, Carlos Rodriguez, had built a reputation for fixing cars that stumped everyone else. His clientele included professional athletes, celebrities, and wealthy business owners who drove Ferraris, Porsches, and yes, Lamborghinis. The first Lamborghini I worked on was a yellow Gallardo with a mysterious electrical problem. The owner had taken it to 3 different shops, including the dealership, and nobody could figure out why it kept going into limp mode. Carlos handed me the keys and said, "Show me what you've got, kid." It took me 6 hours, but I found it, a tiny short in the wiring harness that was sending false signals to the engine management system. The fix cost $12 in parts, but it required completely removing the rear engine cover and tracing dozens of wires with a multimeter. When that Lamborghini roared back to life, running perfectly, I felt a satisfaction that no business class had ever given me. Word spread quickly in Phoenix's luxury car community. I became the guy people called when their exotic cars had problems nobody else could solve. I worked on McLarens, Aston Martins, Bentleys, cars worth more than most people's houses. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was making good money fixing the same types of vehicles Richard used to say represented real success, but Richard and I barely spoke. Patricia would update me on his business wins and losses, and she'd share news about my life with him, but we never talked directly. He'd made it clear that until I came to my senses and returned to finish college, he considered my career choice a temporary rebellion. That changed on a cold October night when his Lamborghini broke down in the middle of nowhere. And suddenly, This mechanic he'd been ashamed of became the only person who could save him. That phone call came on a Thursday night in October. I was finishing up a tricky brake job on a Ferrari 488 when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. After midnight calls were usually drunk drivers who'd hit something and needed a tow. But something made me answer. "Marcus?" The voice was shaky, uncertain. It took me a moment to recognize it as Richard's. "Dad? How did you get this number?" "Your mother gave it to me." There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like wind and distant traffic. I need help." I set down my wrench and walked outside the shop. The parking lot was empty except for my beat-up Ford pickup and the Ferrari I'd been working on. "What kind of help?" "My car broke down. I'm stuck on Highway 60 about 40 miles east of Phoenix. The engine just died. Won't start. Won't do anything." I felt a mixture of confusion and something else. Maybe satisfaction? "Can't you call AAA or the dealership?" I tried everything. "AAA says it'll be 6 hours for a flatbed that can handle a Lamborghini. The dealership won't send anyone out until morning, and their earliest appointment is Monday." His voice cracked. Slightly. "Marcus, I have the Henderson Group presentation tomorrow at 9 a.m. If I miss this meeting, we lose the biggest contract in the company's history." The Henderson Group. Even I knew about them, a massive development firm that was planning a billion-dollar resort complex outside Scottsdale. Landing their financial management contract would triple Blackwood Financial's size overnight. "Where exactly are you?" "Mile marker 223 eastbound." "There's nothing out here, Marcus. Just desert and darkness." I looked at my toolbox, then at the Ferrari. Carlos wouldn't mind if I left it until tomorrow. The owner wasn't picking it up until the weekend anyway. "What are the symptoms? What happened right before it died?" I was driving normally, maybe 75, and suddenly there was this beeping sound. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree with warning lights, then the engine just stopped. Now it won't even turn over. Electrical failure in a Lamborghini. Could be anything from a faulty sensor to a complete ECU meltdown. Without diagnostic equipment, I'd be working blind. But 40 miles wasn't far, and I'd driven to more remote locations for emergency calls. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. "I'll be there in an hour. Don't try to start it again. You might make whatever's wrong worse." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Richard said, "Thank you." I loaded my mobile diagnostic kit into the pickup, along with my most comprehensive tool set. The drive east on Highway 60 took me through increasingly desolate terrain. Phoenix's suburban sprawl gave way to empty desert punctuated by the occasional gas station or truck stop. I found myself wondering what Richard had been doing out here so late. His usual route home from the office was straight through the city. Spotted the Lamborghini's hazard lights long before I reached mile marker 223. The car sat on the shoulder like a wounded animal, a $250,000 piece of Italian engineering reduced to an expensive paperweight. Richard was leaning against the driver's door, still wearing his business suit but looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. He straightened up as I pulled over, his expression cycling through relief, embarrassment, and something that might have been shame. "You came," he said as I climbed out of my truck. "You called." I walked around to the front of the Lamborghini, noting the position of the headlights and the angle of the car. "Tell me exactly what happened, step by step." "I was coming back from Tucson, had a late dinner meeting with potential investors. The car was running perfectly fine until about 10 minutes before I called you." He gestured helplessly at the dashboard. "All these lights came on at once and the engine died. It was like someone just turned off a switch." Tucson. That explained the location. He'd taken the scenic route through the desert instead of the interstate. Probably wanted to enjoy driving the Lamborghini on the winding mountain roads. I popped the hood and shined my flashlight into the engine bay. The Huracan's V10 looked pristine, like it had just rolled off the assembly line. But appearance meant nothing with modern engines. The real problems were usually invisible, hidden in the computer systems that controlled everything. "Hand me that diagnostic scanner from my truck," I told Richard. "The yellow case." He hesitated for a moment, probably not used to taking orders from anyone, especially not from me. But he retrieved the scanner without complaint. I plugged it into the OBD port and waited for the system to boot up. 17 error codes populated the screen. My heart sank. Multiple system failures usually meant one of two things: either a cascading electrical problem or a complete computer failure. Both were expensive, and both were nearly impossible to fix on the side of a highway. "What does it say?" Richard asked, hovering over my shoulder. "Give me a minute." I scrolled through the codes, looking for patterns. Engine management system failure, transmission control module offline, stability control error, airbag system, fault. The list went on. But there was something odd about the sequence. The timestamps showed all the errors had occurred within a 3-second window, which suggested a single catastrophic event rather than gradual system degradation. I started tracing wiring harnesses with my flashlight, looking for obvious damage. Modern Lamborghinis were notorious for electrical gremlins, and the Huracan was no exception. But this looked like more than a typical Italian electrical quirk. "Marcus?" Richard's voice was quiet. Is it bad?" I straightened up and wiped, my hands on a rag. "The computer is showing multiple system failures. Could be a main ECU problem, could be a wiring harness, could be a dozen other things. I won't know until I can trace the root cause." "How long will that take?" I looked at my watch. 1:47 a.m. Honestly, could be 20 minutes, could be 4 hours. Electrical diagnosis is like detective work. You follow the clues until you find the smoking gun. Richard slumped against the car. For the first time in my life, he looked old and defeated. "The Henderson presentation is at 9. If I'm not there, tell me about this contract. What makes it so important?" He ran his hands through his hair, messing up his usually perfect styling. "Blackwood Financial has been hemorrhaging clients for 2 years. The market downturn hit us hard, and some bad investments made us look incompetent. The Henderson Group represents a chance to rebuild everything." He gestured at the Lamborghini. "All this, the house, the cars, the lifestyle, it's all leveraged. If we don't land this contract, I might lose everything." This was a side of Richard I'd never seen. The confident, successful businessman I'd grown up resenting was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely scared. I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected. Sympathy. "Okay," I said, rolling up my sleeves. "Let's figure out what's wrong with your car." I spent the next hour systematically checking every electrical connection I could access. The Huracan's engine bay was cramped, designed more for aesthetics than serviceability. Every bolt required a special tool. Every connector was hidden behind plastic covers. But gradually, I began to understand the car's electrical architecture. The breakthrough came when I was checking the main power distribution box. One of the primary fuses, a large, expensive unit that controlled the engine management system, had blown. But fuses don't just blow randomly. Something has caused an overcurrent condition. I traced the circuit back through the wiring harness, following it from the distribution box toward the engine. That's when I found it. A tiny section of wire where the insulation had worn through, probably from vibration against a sharp edge. The bare wire had grounded against the chassis, creating a massive short circuit that had blown the fuse and crashed the entire electrical system. "Found it!" I called Richard, who was pacing nearby. "Short circuit in the main power feed. The wire rubbed through and grounded out. Can you fix it?" I examined the damage more closely. The wire itself was fine, just the insulation was damaged. A simple repair, but it required the right materials. I need electrical tape and a replacement fuse. The fuse is going to be the problem. It's a special high amperage unit, not something you can buy at a gas station. Richard's face fell. So we're stuck? I thought about the Ferrari back at the shop. Carlos kept a comprehensive inventory of European car parts, including electrical components. Maybe not. I need to make a phone call. Carlos picked up on the second ring, despite it being nearly 3 a.m. Marcus? What's wrong? I need a favor. Do we have any high-amp fuses for a 2018 Huracan? Specifically, a 120-amp main power fuse? There was a pause, then the sound of Carlos getting out of bed. You're working on a Lambo at 3 in the morning? Where are you? Highway 60, middle of nowhere. Long story, but I really need that fuse. Let me check the inventory system. I heard typing in the background. We've got 2 in stock, but Marcus, that's a $400 part. What happened to this car? I explained the situation briefly. The electrical short, the blown fuse, the time crunch. I didn't mention that. The car belonged to my father. Carlos listened without interrupting, then sighed. I'll drive out there. Can't let you strain a customer, especially not with a car worth more than my house. Text me your exact location. Carlos, you don't have to. Yes, I do. That's what we do for each other. I'll be there in 90 minutes. The call ended, and I realized Richard had been listening to every word. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Your boss is driving out here at 3 in the morning to bring you a part? Carlos isn't just my boss. He's... I struggled to find the right words. When I started at Precision, I was good with cars but terrible with customers. Rich people intimidated me. Carlos taught me that everyone deserves respect, whether they drive a Lamborghini or a 20-year-old Honda. Richard nodded slowly. How much will this cost? The fuse is about $400. Labor for an emergency call? I did quick math in my head. Probably another $600. $1,000 to fix a blown fuse? It's not just the fuse, Dad. It's the diagnostic work, the emergency service, the fact that Carlos is driving 2 hours round trip in the middle of the night. When you buy an exotic car, you're not just paying for the machine. You're paying for expertise when things go wrong. Richard walked to the guardrail and stared out at the desert. The highway was completely empty now. We hadn't seen another car in over an hour. I never understood what you did, he said finally. I thought, mechanics just changed oil and rotated tires. I laughed, surprising myself. That's like saying doctors just take temperatures and prescribe aspirin. Modern cars are computers on wheels. This Huracan has more processing power than the space shuttle. When something goes wrong, it takes real skill to figure out what happened. Show me. What? He turned back toward the car. Show me what you found. Explain it to me like I'm not an idiot. I opened the hood again and pointed to the damaged wire. See this? The insulation wore through right here where the harness rubs, against this bracket. When the bare wire touched the chassis, it created a direct path to ground. That's like taking a garden hose and poking a hole in it. All the pressure escapes through the leak. Richard leaned in, genuinely interested. And that caused all the computer systems to fail? Exactly. This wire carries power to the main ECU, the engine control unit. When it shorted out, the massive current draw blew this fuse. I showed him the blackened component. The ECU is like the brain of the car. When it loses power suddenly, it can't communicate with any of the other systems. That's why you got all those warning lights at once. But can you fix it? Once Carlos gets here with the replacement fuse, yeah. I'll repair the damaged wire with proper insulation tape, install the new fuse, and clear all the error codes. The car should start right up. We stood there in the desert silence for a moment. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, and Richard actually shivered despite the warm night air. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Let's just focus on getting your car running. No, Marcus, I need to say this. He sat down on the guardrail, looking older than his 58 years. I spent so long building the business that I forgot what really matters. I was so afraid of being poor again that I became obsessed with appearances. The house, the cars, the country club memberships. It was all about proving I'd made it. A semi-truck thundered past, its headlights briefly illuminating both of us before disappearing into the darkness. When you said you wanted to be a mechanic, all I could think about was my father. He worked in a factory his whole life, came home covered in grease and exhausted every day. I didn't want that for you. But that's not what I do, Dad. I don't work in a factory. I solve problems that million-dollar cars present. I work with cutting-edge technology. Some of my customers are surgeons and CEOs and professional athletes. Richard smiled ruefully. I'm beginning to understand that. Tonight, when every dealership and service center told me they couldn't help, you drove 40 miles in the middle of the night to save me. And your boss, Carlos, he's doing the same thing for you. It's what we do for people we care about. Is that what this is? You still care about me, even after everything I said? I thought about that question while I organized my tools. Did I care about Richard? Despite years of disappointment and criticism, despite his rejection of everything I'd chosen for my life, he was still my father. And tonight, seeing him vulnerable and scared, I realized that maybe I understood him better than I thought. Yeah, I still care. Even when you're being an ass. He laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in our conversation. I've been a pretty big ass, haven't I? Epic level. We talked for the next hour while waiting for Carlos. Richard told me about the early days of his business, how many nights he'd stayed in the office until dawn, how many weekends he'd sacrificed to build. Something from nothing. I told him about some of the interesting cars I'd worked on, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, and the pride I felt when a customer trusted me with their prized possession. You know what's funny? Richard said as headlights finally appeared in the distance. I always thought success meant never having to ask for help. But tonight, the only person who could help me was someone I'd been too proud to appreciate. Carlos pulled up in his pickup truck, looking surprisingly alert for someone who'd been asleep 2 hours ago. He was a stocky man in his 50s with grease-stained hands and a reputation for fairness that had built Precision Automotive's client base. He climbed out carrying a small parts box and a thermos of coffee. "You must be the stranded customer," he said to Richard, extending his hand. "Carlos Rodriguez. Sorry about the circumstances, but Marcus here is the best diagnostic technician I've ever worked with. He'll get you back on the road." Richard shook Carlos's hand firmly. Richard Blackwood. And I'm beginning to realize just how lucky I am that my son chose to work for you. Carlos raised an eyebrow at me. This was clearly not the family dynamic he'd expected based on our previous conversations about my father. Your son? Carlos looked back and forth between us. Marcus never mentioned his father drove a Huracan. We haven't been talking much lately, Richard admitted. My fault entirely. I opened the parts box and found the replacement fuse, along with proper electrical tape and heat shrink tubing. Let's get this car running. Carlos, thanks for driving out here. I owe you big time. We take care of each other, Carlos said, echoing what he'd told me on the phone. That's how family works. He meant the work family at Precision, but I caught Richard's expression. He was beginning to understand that I'd found something he'd never given me, people who valued my skills and supported my choices unconditionally. The repair itself took only 30 minutes, but those 30 minutes changed everything between Richard and me. Carlos held the flashlight while I carefully stripped away the damaged insulation and wrapped the exposed wire with proper electrical tape. Richard watched every move, asking questions about the process and actually listening to the answers. Why? Heat shrink tubing instead of just tape? He asked as I slid the protective sleeve over my repair. Tape can come loose over time. especially with engine heat and vibration. Heat shrink creates a permanent seal that's actually stronger than the original insulation. I applied heat from a small torch, watching the tubing contract and form a tight bond around the wire. This repair will outlast the car. That's professional pride, Carlos observed. Marcus doesn't just fix things. He fixes them better than they were originally. I installed the new fuse and reconnected the battery. Moment of truth, I said, sliding into the driver's seat. The interior still smelled like expensive leather and Richard's cologne. I turned the key. The dashboard lit up normally. No warning. Lights. No error messages. The V10 engine cranked once, twice, then roared to life with that distinctive Lamborghini growl that makes heads turn from 3 blocks away. All 3 of us broke into grins. Diagnostics show all systems normal, I announced, checking the scanner one more time. She's ready to go. Richard walked around the car, running his hand along the hood like he was greeting an old friend. I can't believe you fixed it, out here, in the middle of nowhere, with a flashlight and basic tools. Not basic tools, Carlos corrected. Marcus carries about $15,000 worth of diagnostic equipment in that truck, plus 20 years of training and experience. 20 years? But you're only 26. I climbed out of the Lamborghini and started packing up my equipment. Started learning when I was 6, remember? Frank Murphy taught me that mechanical. Sympathy isn't something you can learn from a textbook. It's something you develop over time. The mention of Frank's name made Richard wince slightly. Frank Murphy. The man I was so rude to at your graduation party. He understood. Frank knew. You were just protecting what you thought was my future. Is he still fixing cars at 73? Still the best teacher I ever had, except he's never let me pay him back for all those lessons. Carlos was loading his tools back into his truck. Speaking of payment, we should settle up so everyone can get some sleep. Richard pulled out his wallet immediately. What do I owe you? I did the math again. Parts, labor, emergency service call, Carlos's time and gas. $1,100 total. Without hesitation, Richard handed over $1,200 bills. The extra 100 is for Carlos driving out here. Thank you both. Carlos tried to refuse the tip, but Richard insisted. You dropped everything to help. My son helped me. That kind of loyalty is worth more than money. As Carlos drove away, Richard and I stood beside the highway looking at each other awkwardly. The crisis was over, the car was running, but neither of us seemed ready to just drive away and pretend this night hadn't happened. I should follow you back to town, I said finally. Make sure nothing else goes wrong. That's probably smart. But Marcus, after we get back, could we maybe talk? Really talk? I nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. The drive back to Phoenix was surreal. Richard's Lamborghini led the way, its taillights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness, while I followed in my beat-up Ford pickup. 2 vehicles that represented completely different philosophies about transportation, yet both serving the same purpose, getting their owners where they needed to go. We stopped at a 24-hour diner near Tempe, one of those chrome and neon places that serves breakfast all night. Richard looked completely out of place in his expensive suit, but he slid into a vinyl booth like he'd been eating at diners his whole life. Coffee? The waitress appeared with a pot before we'd even settled in. Please, we both said simultaneously, then looked at each other and smiled. Richard stirred sugar into his cup thoughtfully. I need to tell you something about tonight. The reason I was coming back from Tucson so late. You said you had a dinner meeting. That was true. But it wasn't. Business. I was visiting your grandfather's grave. That caught me completely off guard. Richard's father had died when I was 12, and we'd rarely talked about him since the funeral. Today, actually, would have been his 75th birthday. I drive down there every year and, well, I usually end up having imaginary conversations with him about how the business is going, about you and your mother, about whether I'm making the right choices. He paused to sip his coffee, collecting his thoughts. This year, I told him about our fight, about how you'd chosen to be a mechanic and how disappointed I was. And you know what I realized, sitting there in that cemetery? He would have been proud of you. Dad spent 40 years working with his hands, building things, fixing things. He understood the value of honest work. The waitress brought menus, but neither of us opened them. I became so obsessed with being different from him that I forgot what made him a good man. He never cared about status or appearances. He cared about doing quality work and providing for his family. Sound familiar? It did sound familiar. Everything Richard had just described about his father applied perfectly to Frank Murphy, to Carlos, to every good mechanic I'd ever known. Tonight, when you diagnosed that electrical problem, when you explained how the systems worked, when you coordinated getting the parts, that wasn't just mechanical work. That was problem-solving at the highest level. That was leadership. Felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. You really mean that? Marcus, I watched you command respect from a successful business owner who drove 2 hours in the middle of the night just because you asked. I saw you take charge of a complex situation and systematically work through it until you found a solution. Those are executive-level skills. But I'm still just a mechanic. Richard shook his head firmly. No, you're a diagnostic specialist. You're a problem solver. You're someone who can take a $250,000 machine that's completely dead and bring it back to life. Most CEOs can't do that. The diner was starting to fill up with early morning commuters and shift workers getting off late jobs. The sun was rising somewhere beyond the windows, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. I have a confession, Richard continued. After you moved out, I started researching what you were doing. I looked up Universal Technical Institute, read about their programs, and checked the salary ranges for automotive technicians. And I learned that master technicians at high-end shops make more money than most people with business degrees. I found out that the automotive industry is desperate for skilled workers, especially people who can work on complex electrical systems. I discovered that you'd chosen a field with incredible job security and growth potential. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. I also learned that you'd graduated at the top of your class and that your instructors had recommended you for advanced training programs. You didn't just stumble into this career, you excelled at it. Why? Didn't you ever tell me you'd looked into it? Because I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong, too stubborn to acknowledge that maybe you knew what was best for your own life. The waitress came back, and we finally ordered pancakes for Richard, eggs and toast for me. Simple food that tasted better than any expensive restaurant meal I'd ever had. So what happens now? I asked. Richard checked his watch. 6:47 a.m. Now I go home, shower, put on a fresh suit, and give the most important presentation of my career. And if I land the Henderson Group contract, I'm going to tell them that my success is built on the same principles my son uses in his work: attention to detail, problem-solving skills, and never giving up when things get complicated. You're really not embarrassed about what I do anymore? Embarrassed? Marcus, after tonight, I'm proud as hell. I'm going to tell everyone who'll listen that my son saved my career by fixing my car in the middle of the desert at 3 in the morning. For the first time in years, I believed him. We parted ways in the diner parking lot just after 7 a.m. Richard had exactly 2 hours to get home, clean up, and make it to the Henderson Group presentation. I watched him drive away in the Lamborghini, the engine purring smoothly, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope that maybe our relationship could actually be repaired. I drove straight to Precision Automotive, where Carlos was already working despite having been up half the night. He looked up from under the hood of a Mercedes S-Class as I walked in. "How'd it go after I left?" he asked, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Better than expected. Way better." I grabbed my coffee mug and filled it from the shop's industrial-strength brewing machine. "Carlos, I need to ask you something. How did..." You know to stock that Lamborghini fuse? He grinned and walked over to his office, gesturing for me to follow. The walls were covered with certificates, customer photos, and a detailed inventory chart that tracked every part in the shop. 3 months ago, you asked me about ordering specialty fuses for European exotics. Said you had a feeling we'd need them eventually. I ordered a bunch of different ones, including that 120-amp unit. He pointed to a line on the inventory sheet. Cost me about $2,000 in parts that might sit on the shelf for years. But you trusted my judgment. Marcus, in 2 years working here, you've never been wrong about what parts we'd need. You see patterns and problems that other techs miss. That's worth investing in. I spent the rest of the morning working on routine maintenance, oil changes, brake inspections, the kind of basic work that keeps a shop profitable. But my mind kept drifting to Richard's presentation. The Henderson Group meeting would determine whether Blackwood Financial survived or collapsed, and I found myself genuinely worried about the outcome. Around noon, my phone rang. Richard's number. How did it go? I answered without saying hello. We got it. His voice was shaky with exhaustion and relief. We got the contract. The whole thing. Financial management, investment planning, even handling their employee pension fund. It's the biggest deal in the company's history. Dad, that's incredible. Congratulations. Marcus, I need to tell you what happened in that meeting. I almost screwed it up completely. I set down my wrench and walked outside where I could hear better. What do you mean? I was about 10 minutes into my presentation when James Henderson, the CEO, interrupted me. He said I looked tired and asked if everything was okay. I should have just said I was fine and kept going. But you didn't? Instead, I told them the truth. I explained that my car had broken down in the middle of the desert, that I'd been up all night, but that my son had driven 40 miles to rescue me. I told them that you'd diagnosed a complex electrical problem and fixed it on the side of a highway with nothing but skill and determination. I could hear traffic in the background. Richard was probably calling from his car. Then Henderson asked what you did for a living. And I said, with more pride than I've ever felt about anything, my son is a master automotive technician. He specializes in high-end European vehicles, and he's the best problem solver I know. My throat felt tight. What did they say? Henderson started laughing. Turns out his son is studying automotive engineering at Michigan State. He said he wished more young people would choose skilled trades instead of assuming they need college degrees to be successful. Then he asked if you'd be willing to look at his vintage Porsche that's been giving 3 different shops trouble. Are you serious? Dead serious. Marcus, your reputation helped me close the deal. When I explained how you'd handled the emergency call, how professional you were, how you'd coordinated getting parts in the middle of the night, they were impressed. Henderson said that kind of problem-solving ability and customer service was exactly what they wanted in their financial advisor. I leaned against my truck, trying to process what I was hearing. For years, Richard had seen my career as an embarrassment. Now it has directly contributed to his biggest business success. There's more, Richard continued. Henderson offered to recommend Blackwood Financial to other business owners in his network, but only if we could demonstrate the same level of service and reliability that you showed last night. That's amazing, Dad. I'm driving over to the shop now. I want to thank Carlos personally, and I have a business proposition for both of you. What kind of proposition? I'll explain when I get there. But Marcus, thank you for last night, for saving my career, for showing me what real success looks like. 20 minutes later, the Lamborghini pulled into Precision Automotive's parking lot. Several customers in the waiting area pressed their faces to the windows, admiring the car. Richard climbed out looking completely different than he had at 3 a.m. Fresh suit, perfect hair, the confident bearing of a man who'd just won the biggest deal of his life. Carlos emerged from the shop bay, curious about the expensive car in his lot. That's your father? He asked me quietly. That's him. Richard walked straight to Carlos and extended his hand. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Richard Blackwood. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did last night. Just doing what anyone would do for the family, Carlos replied, shaking Richard's hand firmly. That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. Richard glanced around the shop, taking in the organized tool stations, the diagnostic equipment, the customer lounge with its leather chairs and coffee service. This is a first-class operation you run here. Thank you. We try to treat every customer's car like it's our own. I can see that, which is why I have a proposal for you both. Richard gestured toward his car. The Henderson Group owns 12 high-end vehicles, Porsches, BMWs, a few Ferraris, and Henderson's personal collection of vintage sports cars. They've been taking them to different shops around the city, never satisfied with the service. Carlos raised an eyebrow. And? I recommended Precision Automotive as their exclusive service provider. If you're interested, it would mean guaranteed monthly revenue of probably $15,000 to $20,000. Carlos whistled softly. That kind of contract would allow him to hire additional technicians and expand the shop. But there's a condition, Richard continued. They want Marcus to be the lead technician on all their vehicles. Henderson was specifically impressed by the emergency service story. I felt everyone's eyes on me. Dad, I already have a job. Which is why my proposal includes a partnership offer, Richard said to Carlos. I'd like to invest in expanding this business. We could add a second bay, upgrade to the latest diagnostic equipment, maybe even start a mobile service division for emergency calls. Carlos looked stunned. You want to invest in an auto shop? I want to invest in quality and expertise. Last night taught me that those things have real value. Richard pulled out a business card and handed it to Carlos. Think about it. We could create something unique, a premium automotive service that combines Marcus's technical skills with professional business practices. A customer walked up, keys in hand, and Carlos excused himself to handle the transaction. Richard and I stood alone beside the Lamborghini. You don't have to answer now, he said, but I meant what I said in the diner. I'm proud of what you've built here, and I want to be part of it if you'll let me. What about Blackwood Financial? The Henderson contract? The business practically runs itself now. I've got good people handling day-to-day operations. He smiled. Besides, I think I'd enjoy working with my hands for a change. Maybe you could teach me a thing or two about cars. I thought about Frank Murphy, about all the lessons he'd taught me in his garage, about how skills and knowledge were meant to be passed down, shared, built upon. Okay, I said. But if we're going to work together, you need to understand something. In this business, it doesn't matter what kind of car you drive or what your bank balance looks like. What matters is whether you can solve problems and treat people with respect. Richard nodded seriously. I'm ready to learn. Good, because your first lesson starts now. I pointed to a stain on the shop floor. Grab a mop. We've got work to do. 6 months later, Precision Automotive looked completely different. Richard's investment had funded a major expansion, 2 additional service bays, a climate-controlled parts warehouse, and a customer lounge that rivaled luxury car dealerships. The mobile service division was already booking emergency calls 3 weeks in advance. I stood in the new diagnostics bay, watching Richard struggle to connect an OBD scanner to a Ferrari 458. His expensive suits had been replaced with Precision Automotive work shirts, though he still insisted on wearing leather shoes instead of steel-toed boots. The connector won't fit, he said, holding up the cable with frustration, because you're trying to force it. Each car has a different port location and angle. I walked over and guided his hands to the correct position. Feel for the alignment. Don't just push. The scanner clicked into place and Richard's face lit up like he'd solved a complex equation. Got it. Good. Now run the full system scan and tell me what codes come up. Richard had been working part-time at the shop for 3 months, learning everything from basic tool identification to computer diagnostics. He wasn't ready to work on customer cars yet. but his business experience had proven invaluable for managing the Henderson Group contract and developing new service packages. Carlos emerged from under a Bentley Mulsanne, wiping his hands on a eye rag. "The Henderson Group is here for their monthly meeting," he announced. James Henderson arrived every fourth Thursday to review service reports and discuss upcoming needs for his company's fleet. What had started as a simple maintenance contract had evolved into something much bigger. Precision Automotive now handled pre-purchase inspections for Henderson's real estate acquisitions, provided expert testimony for insurance claims, and even offered automotive consulting for his construction projects. Henderson walked into the shop accompanied by his son David, a junior at Michigan State, who spent his summer breaks interning with us. David had inherited his father's passion for cars, but combined it with modern engineering knowledge that often impressed even experienced technicians. "Marcus, I've got something special for you," Henderson said, producing a set of keys. 1987, Porsche 911 Turbo. Owner claims it's been restored, but something doesn't feel right. I need your expert opinion before I make an offer. I took the keys, noting their weight and the worn Porsche crest. "What's the asking price?" $200,000. If it's authentic and properly restored, that's fair market value. If not? Henderson shrugged. "I need to know what I'm buying." We walked outside where a guard's red 911 Turbo sat gleaming in the Arizona sun. The car looked perfect from 20 feet away. Flawless paint, pristine interior, engine bay that sparkled like jewelry. But something subtle in the proportions caught my attention immediately. "David, what do you think?" I asked Henderson's son. The young man circled the car slowly, examining details that most people would miss. "The rear spoiler looks correct for the year. Body panels appear straight, but..." He crouched beside the front wheel. "These brake calipers are wrong. 1987 should have 4-piston Brembos, but these are 6-piston units from a much newer car." "Good eye. What else?" Richard had been following our conversation with intense interest. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have understood any of this technical discussion. Now he was learning to see cars the way we did, not just as transportation, but as complex systems where every detail mattered. I popped the hood and immediately spotted several red flags. "Henderson, this car has been modified extensively. The turbocharger is from a 1989 model, the intercooler has been upgraded, and the engine management system is completely aftermarket." "Is that bad?" "Not necessarily, but it's not what you're paying for. This isn't a restored 1987. It's a heavily modified car built to look original. The performance is probably better than the factory, but the collector value is significantly lower." Henderson nodded thoughtfully. "What would you estimate it's actually worth?" I spent another 20 minutes examining the suspension, drivetrain, and interior details. "Maybe $120,000, assuming everything functions properly. It's a nice car, but it's not the authentic restoration the seller claims." "You just saved me $80,000, Henderson said, shaking my hand. "This is exactly why I value your expertise." As Henderson and David left to renegotiate with the seller, Carlos gathered the team for our weekly meeting. The shop now employed 6 full-time technicians, 2 apprentices, and a dedicated customer service representative. Richard had insisted on profit sharing for all employees, saying that everyone who contributed to the success should benefit from it. "Numbers look good this month," Carlos announced, reviewing the financial reports that Richard had taught him to interpret. "Henderson Group contract is performing ahead of projections. Mobile service bookings are up 30%, and customer satisfaction scores are the highest we've ever recorded." One of the newer technicians, Jake Morrison, raised his hand. "When do we find out about the automotive training partnership?" The partnership was Richard's latest project, an agreement with Universal Technical Institute to create an advanced internship program at Precision Automotive. Students would get hands-on experience with exotic cars while earning college credits, and we'd have access to eager apprentices who could handle routine maintenance while learning from experienced techs. UTI approved the proposal yesterday, Richard announced. We'll start with 4 interns this fall, expanding to 8 by next year. The meeting wrapped up with assignments for the following week. As the team dispersed, Richard approached me with an envelope in his hand. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a letter from the Arizona Automotive Association, officially recognizing me as Master Technician of the Year. The award came with a $5,000 prize and an invitation to speak at the state conference. "How did you—" I started to ask, then saw Richard's satisfied smile. "You nominated me. I nominated you because you deserve recognition. The letter mentions your emergency service to the Henderson Group, your diagnostic expertise, and your contributions to training the next generation of technicians." I read through the citation, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. "This is a big deal, Dad. Master Technician of the Year is like, it's the highest honor in the field." "I know. I researched it thoroughly before submitting your nomination." Richard's expression grew serious. "Marcus, I spent so many years trying to push you toward what I thought success should look like. I never bothered to learn what success actually meant in your chosen field." We walked outside where his Lamborghini sat next to my Ford pickup. 6 months ago, those 2 vehicles had represented everything that separated us. Now they just seemed like different tools for different jobs. "Want to grab dinner?" Richard asked. "Patricia is making a pot roast, and she's been asking when you're coming by the house." "I'd like that." As we prepared to leave, Frank Murphy's old pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. The retired mechanic climbed out slowly, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints had absorbed decades of physical labor. He'd been stopping by regularly since Richard had tracked him down to apologize for that awkward encounter at my graduation party. "Evening, boys," Frank said, walking over to examine the latest additions to our diagnostic equipment. "Marcus, that new oscilloscope working out for you?" "Game changer." Yesterday, I tracked down an intermittent ignition problem that would have taken hours with conventional tools. Frank nodded approvingly. "Technology keeps advancing, but the principles stay the same. Listen to what the machine is telling you. Follow the evidence. Never assume anything." "Frank," Richard said, "I wanted to thank you again for agreeing to consult on the training program. Having someone with your experience to mentor the interns will make all the difference." "Happy to help. These young people deserve proper guidance." Frank glanced between Richard and me. "Besides, it's good to see families working together. That's how trades used to be passed down, father to son, generation to generation." As Frank drove away, Richard and I stood in the parking lot watching the sun set over the Phoenix Mountains. The shop was quiet now, but tomorrow it would fill, again with the sounds of problem-solving, engines running, tools clicking, technicians collaborating to bring broken machines back to life. "You know what's funny?" Richard said finally. "I spent my whole career trying to build something that would last, something I could be proud of. But watching you work, seeing the respect you've earned, understanding the complexity of what you do, I realize you'd already built exactly what I was searching for." "We built it together," I corrected. "All of us. Carlos, Frank, even Henderson and David. This isn't just a business. It's a community." Richard smiled and pulled out his phone to call Patricia, letting her know we were both coming for dinner. As he talked to my mother, I looked back at Precision Automotive, the expanded bays, the new equipment, the sign that now read Blackwood and Rodriguez Automotive Solutions. Sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes what looks like a breakdown is actually the beginning of something better. And sometimes, when everything seems hopeless, the person you need most is someone you never thought to ask for help. My father had called me just a mechanic for years. Now he understood what I'd always known. There's no such thing as just a mechanic. There are only people willing to get their hands dirty solving problems that nobody else can fix. And in the end, that's exactly what we did for each other. 2 years after that night on Highway 60, I received a phone call that would change everything once again. This time, it wasn't an emergency. It was an opportunity that neither Richard nor I had seen coming. Marcus Blackwood? The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight German accent. Speaking. This is Klaus Weber from Porsche Cars North America. We've been following your work with the Henderson Group and your diagnostic expertise with European vehicles. We have a proposition that might interest you. I set down my wrench and walked to Carlos's office for privacy. Klaus Weber was a name I recognized, head of technical training for Porsche's North American operations, responsible for certifying master technicians at dealerships across the continent. What kind of proposition? We're launching a new program called the Porsche Excellence Initiative. We want to partner with independent shops that demonstrate exceptional technical capability and customer service. Based on multiple recommendations, Blackwood and Rodriguez is at the top of our list. The program Klaus described was unprecedented. Porsche would provide factory training, diagnostic equipment, and direct access to technical support normally reserved for dealerships. In exchange, we'd become an authorized Porsche service center, the first independent shop in Arizona to receive that designation. There's one condition, Klaus continued. The lead technician must complete intensive certification at our training facility in Atlanta. 4 weeks of advanced coursework covering everything from classic air-cooled engines to the latest hybrid technology. When would this start? Next month, if you're interested. But Mr. Blackwood, I should mention that this program typically requires significant financial investment from participating shops. Your reputation has convinced us to waive most of those fees. After Klaus hung up, I sat in Carlos's office staring at the phone. Becoming a factory-authorized Porsche center would elevate our shop to an entirely new level. But 4 weeks in Atlanta meant leaving during our busiest season, and the responsibility was enormous. Carlos found me 20 minutes later, still processing the conversation. Good news or bad news? He asked, settling into his desk chair. Potentially incredible news. Porsche wants to make us an authorized service center. Carlos's eyebrows shot up. Authorized? Like official factory backing? I explained the program, the training requirements, and the timeline. Carlos listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding as he grasped the implications. This could triple our business, he said finally. Every Porsche owner in Arizona would have a reason to come here instead of driving to the dealership. But it's a huge commitment. If I mess up the certification, we lose everything. Marcus, you've never failed a technical challenge in your life. Remember the first day you worked here? I gave you that impossible Gallardo problem just to see what you'd do. You solved it in 6 hours. Richard appeared in the doorway, having overheard part of our conversation. His work shirt was stained, with hydraulic fluid from a Maserati he'd been helping diagnose, a sight that still amazed me after 2 years. What's this about Porsche? He asked. I filled him in on Klaus Weber's call and the certification opportunity. Richard's business instincts kicked in immediately, and I could see him running calculations in his head. The financial upside is enormous, he said. But the real value is credibility. Factory authorization would validate everything we've built here. You think I should do it? Richard and Carlos exchanged glances. Son, Richard said, this is why you became a mechanic. Not to change oil or rotate tires, but to master the most complex machines ever built. This is your chance to become one of the top Porsche technicians in the country. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the lobby of Porsche's North American headquarters in Atlanta, surrounded by technicians from dealerships across the United States and Canada. The training facility was impressive. Climate-controlled bays equipped with the latest diagnostic equipment, cutaway engines for educational purposes, and instructors who'd trained directly at the factory in Stuttgart, Germany. The first day humbled everyone. Even experienced Porsche technicians struggled with the advanced coursework. We learned about hybrid powertrains that combined electric motors with traditional engines, diagnostic procedures for systems so complex they required specialized computers just to communicate with them, and repair techniques for carbon fiber body panels that cost more than most people's annual salaries. My roommate was David Chen, a master technician from a Beverly Hills dealership who'd been working on Porsches for 15 years. On our third night, as we studied wiring diagrams for the new 911 Turbo S, he asked about my background. Independent shop in Arizona, I told him. We specialize in high-end European cars. No dealership experience? None. Learned everything at a technical college and worked with master techs. David looked impressed. Most of the guys here have been in the Porsche ecosystem their whole careers. It's rare to see someone from outside the network. Does that make this harder for me? Actually, it might make it easier. You're not locked into dealership thinking. Some of the diagnostic approaches they're teaching here, you've probably already figured out on your own. David was right. Many of the problem-solving techniques that Klaus and the other instructors demonstrated were variations of methods Frank Murphy had taught me years earlier. Listen to what the machine is telling you. Follow the evidence systematically. Never assume you know the answer before completing the diagnosis. The final exam was a practical test using a 2019 911 GT3 RS with multiple interconnected problems. Each student had 4 hours to diagnose and repair whatever issues the instructors had deliberately introduced. Failure meant starting the entire program over. I approached the GT3 methodically, beginning with a comprehensive computer scan before touching any physical components. The initial results showed 17 different error codes across multiple systems: engine management, suspension control, navigation, even the automatic climate system. But something about the error pattern looked familiar. The timestamps showed all the problems had begun within a 90-second window, suggesting a single root cause rather than multiple independent failures. I'd seen this before. Following a hunch, I traced the main power distribution system back to the battery and alternator. Everything appeared normal until I checked the ground connections. One of the primary ground straps, a thick cable that connects the engine to the chassis, had been deliberately loosened just enough to create intermittent contact. A loose ground connection can cause exactly the kind of cascading electrical failures I was seeing. As the car vibrated during operation, the loose connection would make and break contact, sending voltage spikes throughout the electrical system and confusing every computer in the vehicle. I tightened the ground strap, cleared all the error codes, and started the engine. The GT3's flat-six engine settled into its characteristic idle, smooth, and powerful. All the warning lights disappeared, and every system showed normal operation. Klaus appeared beside me as I was documenting my findings. How long did that take? You? I checked my watch. 97 minutes. Hour and a half, including documentation. And your diagnosis? Loose primary ground connection causing system-wide electrical interference, fixed by proper torquing of the ground strap to factory. Specification. Klaus made notes on his clipboard, his expression unreadable. Most students spend 3 hours on this test. Many never find the actual problem. I've seen this exact issue before, on a Lamborghini. Different car, same electrical principle. That's the mark of a true diagnostic technician, recognizing patterns across different platforms. Klaus smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Congratulations, Mr. Blackwood. You've passed with the highest score in this session. The flight back to Phoenix gave me time to process what I'd accomplished. Factory certification from Porsche was more than just a credential. It was validation that the path I'd chosen, despite Richard's initial objections, had led somewhere. Meaningful Carlos and Richard met me at the airport, both grinning like proud parents. The shop had survived my 4-week absence, though they'd accumulated a backlog of complex diagnostics that only I could handle. How did it go? Carlos asked as we loaded my luggage. We're now officially authorized. Klaus said the paperwork should be finalized within 2 weeks. Richard clapped me on the shoulder. I'm proud of you, son, but I'm not surprised. You've been proving your excellence for years. Now you just have the official recognition to go with it. The drive back to the shop took us past the stretch of Highway 60, where Richard's Lamborghini had broken down 2 years earlier. The mile marker 223 sign flashed by in the darkness, marking the spot where everything between us had changed. You know what I realized during the certification? I said as we pulled into the shop parking lot. What's that? That night when your car broke down, you weren't just calling me for help with a mechanical problem. You were finally ready to admit that maybe I knew something you didn't. Richard nodded slowly. Best phone call I ever made. Inside the shop, the walls now displayed certificates from multiple manufacturers: Porsche, Ferrari, Lamborghini, McLaren. Our customer base included celebrities, professional athletes, and business leaders from across the Southwest. The mobile service division had expanded to cover emergencies throughout Arizona and into neighboring states. But more than the success, more than the recognition, what mattered most was that Richard and I had found our way back to each other. We'd built something together that neither of us could have created alone, a business based on expertise, integrity, and the understanding that every problem has a solution if you're willing to work hard enough to find it. Frank Murphy stopped by the next morning to congratulate me on the Porsche certification. At 75, he still had grease under his fingernails and still carried tools in his truck, just in case. Your father called me yesterday, Frank said as we examined the new Porsche diagnostic equipment. Wanted to thank me for teaching you properly. He actually said that? Said he'd been wrong about mechanical work, that he understood now why you'd chosen this path. Frank smiled. Told him I always knew you'd make something special of yourself. Just took him a while to see it. As Frank drove away, I looked around. The shop that had become so much more than just a business. It was proof that sometimes the best way forward isn't the path everyone expects you to take. Sometimes you have to break down completely before you can build something better. The success of our Porsche authorization opened doors I'd never imagined. Within 6 months, we received inquiries from McLaren, Aston Martin, and even Bugatti about potential partnerships. Each manufacturer had heard about our diagnostic capabilities and emergency service reputation through industry networks. Richard embraced his new role as business development manager, using his corporate connections to build relationships with luxury car collectors throughout the Southwest. He'd discovered he had a natural talent for understanding what high-end customers wanted, not just technical competence, but genuine passion for automotive excellence. I have a meeting next week with the CEO of Scottsdale Exotic Cars, Richard announced during our monthly team gathering. They want to discuss an exclusive service partnership for their rental fleet. The rental fleet consisted of vehicles most people only saw in movies: Ferraris, Lamborghinis, McLarens that customers could rent for special occasions or weekend adventures. Maintaining these cars required technicians who understood both performance and reliability, since breakdowns could ruin someone's once-in-a-lifetime experience. Carlos had evolved too, transforming from shop owner to operations director of what was becoming a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He'd enrolled in business management courses at the local community college, determined to match Richard's financial expertise with his own mechanical knowledge. Next quarter, we're projecting 40% growth, Carlos reported, consulting the detailed spreadsheets that Richard had taught him to create. Mobile service calls are booked solid through the summer, and the Porsche authorization has generated 63 new customers since Marcus returned from Atlanta. But our biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. David Henderson had graduated from Michigan State with a degree in automotive engineering and wanted to create an apprentice program that combined academic theory with hands-on experience. His father's development company would fund the initiative, but they needed an educational partner. Think of it as a graduate school for automotive technicians, David explained during a presentation at the shop. Students would work here 3 days a week and attend advanced engineering classes 2 days a week. After 18 months, they'd earn both a master's certificate in automotive technology and practical experience with exotic vehicles. The program would attract students from across the country, positioning our shop as a leader in automotive education. More importantly, it would provide a pipeline of highly trained technicians as the industry evolved toward electric and hybrid powertrains. Richard was fascinated by the educational component. This could be the foundation for something much larger, he mused. Imagine if we could franchise this model, technical excellence combined with business acumen, backed by manufacturer authorizations. Within a year, the Henderson Automotive Institute was accepting its first class of 12 students. The garage buzzed with activity as experienced technicians mentored eager apprentices working on everything from vintage Porsches to cutting-edge hybrid supercars. I found myself in a teaching role I'd never expected, passing along the diagnostic philosophies that Frank Murphy had instilled in me decades earlier. The students were bright, motivated, and hungry for knowledge that traditional automotive programs couldn't provide. Remember, I told a group working on a McLaren 720S Spider, every exotic car is essentially a hand-built prototype. The tolerances are tighter, the materials are more exotic, and the engineering pushes every component to its absolute limit. You can't approach these vehicles with conventional thinking. One student, Sarah Chen, David Chen's daughter, had transferred from MIT's mechanical engineering program specifically to join our institute. Her combination of theoretical knowledge and practical curiosity made her an exceptional diagnostician. Marcus, I've been analyzing the data from our hybrid vehicle services, Sarah said, approaching me with a laptop full of performance charts. I think I've identified a pattern that could help us predict component failures before they happen. Her research involved monitoring sensor data from hybrid systems to identify subtle changes that preceded major breakdowns. If successful, her predictive maintenance algorithms could revolutionize how exotic car owners manage their vehicles. Show me what you found, I said, genuinely interested in her analysis. Sarah pulled up complex graphs showing voltage patterns, temperature fluctuations, and efficiency metrics from a dozen different hybrid supercars we'd serviced. Look at this data from 3 weeks before the McLaren P1 needed its hybrid battery replacement. The voltage regulation shows microscopic irregularities that gradually increase until failure. She was right. The patterns were subtle but consistent across multiple vehicles. With proper monitoring, owners could schedule maintenance before catastrophic failures occurred, saving thousands of dollars and preventing dangerous breakdowns. This is brilliant work, Sarah. Have you considered submitting this to the Society of Automotive Engineers? Actually, I was hoping you'd co-author the paper with me. Your practical experience combined with my theoretical analysis could make a real contribution to the field. 6 months later, our joint research paper was published in SAE International's journal, earning recognition from automotive engineers worldwide. The predictive maintenance system became a standard service offering for our high-end customers, further cementing our reputation for innovation. Richard attended the SAE conference where I presented our findings, sitting in the front row with obvious pride as I explained our diagnostic methodologies to an audience of industry experts. Afterward, several major manufacturers approached us about licensing our predictive maintenance technology. 20 years ago, I thought success meant corner offices and stock portfolios, Richard said as we flew home from the conference. Now I realize it means solving problems that nobody else can solve and teaching others to do the same. The transformation in our relationship had been complete, but it wasn't just personal. It had become professional as well. Richard's business acumen combined with my technical expertise had created something neither of us could have achieved alone. Patricia often remarked that our dinner conversations had become incomprehensible to anyone outside the automotive industry. We'd debate the merits of different diagnostic approaches, discuss the latest manufacturer technical bulletins, and plan expansion strategies for the educational program. "Remember when you two couldn't be in the same room without arguing?" she said one evening as Richard and I reviewed applications for the next institute class. "Now you finish each other's sentences when you're talking about torque specifications, the T." Shop had grown from 8 employees to 26, including instructors, administrative staff, and a research division focused on emerging automotive technologies. Our customer base included Fortune 500 executives, professional athletes, entertainment industry figures, and exotic car collectors from around the world. But perhaps the most satisfying development was Frank Murphy's decision to come out of retirement and join our teaching staff. His practical wisdom provided a perfect counterbalance to the high-tech approach that defined modern automotive service. "These young people need to understand that all the computers in the world can't replace mechanical intuition," Frank said, during a lecture on engine rebuilding. "You've got to feel what the machine is telling you, not just read what the scanner says." Frank's classes became legendary among our students. He could diagnose complex problems by listening to engine sounds that computerized systems missed, and he taught troubleshooting approaches that solved mysteries other technicians couldn't unravel. The integration of traditional mechanical knowledge with cutting-edge technology became our signature approach. Students learned to rebuild carburetors and diagnose hybrid battery systems with equal proficiency, preparing them for careers that spanned automotive history from classic restoration to future innovation. As I stood in the expanded facility one evening, watching students and instructors collaborate on a variety of challenging projects, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. What had started as a desperate phone call on a dark highway had evolved into something none of us could have envisioned. Richard emerged from the business office, having finished the quarterly financial review that showed continued growth across all divisions. The man who had once been embarrassed by his son's career choice now served as our primary advocate with investors, manufacturers, and educational institutions. "The University of Arizona wants to discuss a formal partnership," he announced. "They're interested in developing a 4-year automotive engineering degree that includes hands-on training at our institute. Such a partnership would create the first university-level program that combined academic automotive engineering with practical exotic car experience. Graduates would be uniquely qualified for careers with manufacturers, racing teams, or specialized service facilities." "What do you think?" Richard asked. I looked around at everything we'd built, the state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment, the enthusiastic students, the walls covered with manufacturer certifications and industry awards. Most importantly, I saw the community of passionate professionals we'd assembled, all united by a shared commitment to automotive excellence. "I think," I said finally, "that sometimes when your father calls you just a mechanic, the best response is to become the kind of mechanic who changes the entire industry." Richard smiled and put his arm around my shoulders. "That's exactly what you did, son. And in the end, it saved us both. And sometimes when your father calls you just a mechanic, the best response is to become the kind of mechanic he can't help but respect. That's exactly what I did. And in the end, it saved us both." Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.